Let's analyze what is known so far about the assassination of JFK, step by step. We will analyze the different theories about who killed him, and we will see from certain forensic analyses that were done outside the FBI, that the theory that Oswald was not the assassin. Let's begin. Kennedy gets up early on November 22 and gives what would be his last speech in life, then boards a white Lincoln Continental and heads to Carswell Air Force Base to board the presidential plane. At 11:40 Air Force One lands at Dallas Love Field Airport, after a short 13-minute flight from Fort Worth. The presidential entourage boards a Lincoln X-100, codenamed SS-100X by the Secret Service, and sets off towards downtown Dallas. In the driver's seat is an agent driver and as a passenger another security agent. In the seats next to each other are Governor Connally, on the right, and his wife. In the back seats are Kennedy, on the right, and his wife. The car has no transparent roof. During the journey, the motorcade has to make several stops so that the president can greet people. At 12:30 it enters Dealey Plaza and proceeds along Houston Street, at which point it is 6 minutes late. At the corner of Houston Street and Elm Street, the motorcade has to make a 120-degree turn to the left, which forces the limousine to slow down after passing Elm Street, which is in front of the Texas School Book Warehouse building, at a distance of 20 meters just after the first of 3 shots supposedly fired by Lee Harvey Oswald was fired. The first shot was deflected by a traffic light and bounced off the concrete, slightly wounding witness James Tague. 3.5 seconds later the second shot hits Kennedy from behind in the back and exits through his throat. Kennedy puts both hands on his throat, raising his elbows while his wife watches in astonishment. Governor Connally is wounded from behind by this shot. 3. After the second shot, the president, still with both hands on his throat, stops greeting the public and turns to the left. His wife pulls him to lay him down on the seat, approaching him with his wife's head next to his. The fatal third shot occurs 4.8 seconds after the first shot, just as the car passes in front of the concrete pergola. When the third shot is fired, it visibly hits Kennedy's right parietal bone, and Jackie Kennedy suddenly lets go of her husband, who lies down on her left side, while she straddles the back of the car. The governor's wife throws herself to the ground and drops some flowers. A citizen, Abraham Zapruder, who was filming the presidential motorcade, managed to clearly capture on film the moment when Kennedy is hit by 2 of the 3 shots. This film is part of the evidence that the Warren Commission used in its investigation of the assassination. According to the investigation carried out by the Warren Commission, Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged shooter, would have used an Italian-made Carcano M91/38 bolt-action rifle with a telescopic sight. To have been able to fire these shots with such certainty, the assassin would have had experience as a sniper. Texas Governor John Bowdoin Connally Jr., who was in the same car, sitting in front of the president, was also seriously wounded, but survived. His wound occurred almost at the same time as the first shot that hit Kennedy, theoretically as a result of the same bullet, which has given rise to the so-called magic bullet theory. Point 4 Apparently, his wife's action of laying him on her lap helped save his life since it prevented to a greater extent the pneumothorax produced by the wound. James Tague, a spectator and witness to the assassination, also received a small wound on the right side of his face, and was located 82 meters in front of the place where Kennedy was hit. After the shooting, the Lincoln left the place in a hurry. The rest of the way I was holding John, holding his head to prevent his brain from coming out, the president's wife would later relate. After a frantic race, JFK and the governor of Texas are taken from the car to the door of Parkland Hospital. Although there was no hope, Doctors James Carrico and Malcolm Perry, the first to attend to him, in that order, did not hesitate to try the impossible. To revive his pulse and breathing, they decided to perform a tracheotomy using the bullet wound in Kennedy's throat, the only one visible, apart from the horrendous damage to his head. It was useless, because even if they had restored his vital signs, half his brain was outside his skull and there was no longer any neuronal activity, as neurosurgeon Kemper Clark would confirm. About 40 minutes later, all attempts were abandoned and 1 p.m. Dallas time was agreed upon as the time of JFK's death. Governor Connally underwent 2 emergency operations that day. After the presidential plane, Air Force One, landed at Andrews Air Force Base, outside Washington, D.C., Kennedy's body was transferred to Bethesda Naval Hospital for an autopsy. The autopsy was performed by 3 Navy physicians with 30 military officers as witnesses. 2 retired FBI agents who were present testified that Kennedy had a large wound on the right side of his head, another wound approximately 5.5 inches below the collar of his jacket above the right side of his spine, and a third wound on the anterior aspect of his throat at the lower edge of his Adam's apple. The Warren Commission made this same report. The FBI report on the autopsy was performed by Special Agents Siebert and O'Neill. 1. Archived October 31, 2009, at the Wayback Machine. Several photos and X-rays were taken during the autopsy, several of which have since disappeared from official reports. The autopsy photos, prepared by the Assassination Records and Review Board, can be viewed here. Archived August 29, 2008, at the Wayback Machine and here. After the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital, Kennedy's body was prepared for burial and taken to the White House and laid in state in the East Room for 24 hours. On the Sunday following the assassination, draped with the U.S. flag, it was taken to the Capitol for public viewing. Throughout the day and night, hundreds of thousands of people visited the casket. Representatives from 90 countries, including the Soviet Union, attended the funeral on November 25, his son JFK Jr.'s 3rd birthday. After the funeral, held at St. Matthew's Cathedral, he was taken by horse-drawn carriage to Arlington Cemetery where he was buried. Also, during his funeral, El Duelo de la Patria, The Duel of the Fatherland, a work by Costa Rican Rafael Chavez Torres, was performed. The funeral was officiated by the Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal Richard Cushing, a personal friend of Kennedy, who had married John and Jacqueline Kennedy and baptized their 2 children and who had also officiated the funeral of his son Patrick, who died 15 weeks before his father. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested 80 minutes after the assassination of Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit and was charged with the deaths of Tippit and Kennedy late in the afternoon of November 22. Oswald always denied having shot the president. Oswald's case was never tried because 2 days later, while he was being transferred and guarded by the police, Jack Ruby, a Dallas gangster, shot him and killed him. Official investigations. Dallas Police. After the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald and the collection of physical evidence at the crime scene, at 22:30 Central Standard Time on November 22, 4:30 Universal Time coordinated on November 23, Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry was ordered by people in Washington, according to his own words, to send all the material to FBI headquarters, but not to Oswald. He described that there were shell casings of the same caliber in a window more than 1,500 meters away. FBI investigation. The FBI was the first authority to complete an official investigation. On December 9, 1963, only 17 days after the assassination, the FBI report was delivered to the Warren Commission. The report established that only 3 shots were fired. The first hit President Kennedy, the second hit Governor Connally, and the third hit the president's head, killing him. The FBI concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald fired all 3 shots. The Warren Commission. The first official investigation into the assassination was established by President Lyndon B. Johnson on November 29, 1963, a week after the assassination. It was chaired by Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and was universally, but not officially, known as the Warren Commission. The Commission's final report was published in September 1964, after 10 months of investigation. The report concluded that it could find no persuasive evidence of an internal or external conspiracy involving other persons, groups, or countries, and that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. However, much evidence has accumulated around the possibility of a conspiracy. The very fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA agent has been studied on several occasions. It began with Victor Marchetti, who in his book Cult of Intelligence described the double agent programs in which Oswald was allegedly involved. House Select Committee on Assassinations. The U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, was created in 1976 to investigate the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The committee's investigations lasted until 1978, and in 1979 they issued their final report. The HSCA concluded in its 1979 report, among other things, that President John F. Kennedy was likely assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee further concluded that 4 shots were fired and that the third shot was fired by a second assassin located at the grassy knoll but missed. The Justice Department, FBI, CIA, and the Warren Commission were severely criticized for their poor performance in their investigations, and the Secret Service was criticized for its deficient protection of the president. Theories about the JFK assassination. Official investigations. 1964 Conclusions of the Warren Commission Report. 1978 Conclusions of the HSCA, House Select Committee on Assassinations. 1998 Conclusions of the ARRB, in preparation. Conspiracy theories. 1967 The Jim Garrison Investigation. 1963 to 1999 Other conspiracy theories. Alleged confession by E. Howard Hunt. According to his son, Howard Hunt, a senior member of the CIA, confessed on his deathbed the alleged true plot behind this assassination. According to Hunt, the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, was the mastermind behind the assassination, eager to seize power after 2 years as Vice President and seeing his chances of succeeding Kennedy fading. The assassination was allegedly planned by certain CIA agents who were against Kennedy, such as Hunt himself or Cord Meyer, whose wife was having an affair with the then president. The sniper was allegedly a CIA hitman from the Corsican Mafia named Lucien Sardi. However, Hunt's widow and other children refuted these claims, suggesting that the sons manipulated their father's loss of lucidity for financial gain and fabricated his confession. The material provided by the sons was considered inconclusive by the Los Angeles Times. Other protagonists. Memorandum from the United States Department of Justice recommending that Jack Ruby be rejected as a witness because he was an employee of then-Congressman Richard Nixon. J.D. Tippit, Dallas police officer shot by Oswald in the Oak Cliff neighborhood after the assassination. Captain W. Fritz, Dallas police captain in charge of the investigation. Jack Rubenstein, dance hall entrepreneur and Oswald's assassin. Jack Ruby was already known to the authorities in 1947 when he served as a witness for Richard Nixon during the McCarthy witch hunt. An FBI document from 1947 recommends that an individual named Jack Rubenstein, given name, should not be called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee because he worked for Congressman Richard Nixon. 910 According to the Warren Commission, Ruby had connections to Oswald, the Mafia, or American politicians. Lyndon B. Johnson, 36th President of the United States. Jim Garrison, New Orleans prosecutor. In 1967 he conducted an investigation into a possible conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy, which was made into a film in 1991 by Oliver Stone. James Files, on March 22, 1994, this individual incriminated Eleven himself of having been the one who fired the shot from the grassy knoll. Richard Nixon. Soviet organizations and Fidel Castro. The FBI and the CIA. Similarities with other presidential deaths in office. U.S. presidents elected at 20-year intervals, particularly those who won elections held in years ending in 0, often had the tragic coincidence of dying in office. The series of cases began in 1841 with William Henry Harrison, elected in 1840, and continued with Abraham Lincoln, 1860, in 1865, Garfield, 1880, in 1881, McKinley, 1900, in 1901, Harding, 1920, in 1923, Roosevelt, 1940, in 1945, with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, 1960, only continuing this pattern, his death being the 7th in a row. The series was only broken by Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, who survived being shot in March 1981 and was able to finish his term in 1989, and by George W. Bush, elected in 2000, who was assassinated with a grenade in 2005, but who was able to finish his term in 2009, being the two exceptions so far. This pattern of presidential deaths is known as the Tecumseh Curse. After the assassination of JFK, many false similarities have been created with that of Abraham Lincoln. There are still many situations to explain. 1. How a bullet that passes through several parts of the body changes direction and then the casing is intact, as the FBI shows in the original casings of the assassination. 2. The real report of the doctors who certified his death had disappeared, so the FBI modified the story to their liking. 3. The limousine car in which the tragedy occurred was immediately taken away, cleaned, and the front window changed. Why did they do this if the FBI said that the shot came from behind and there were no impacts on the windows? 4. Why did the FBI give the order to the escorts that they should surround the car as they always did, not to do it, not to stand behind or to the sides? 5.3 leads to this point where, according to independent forensic experts, they have studied the different places where the shots could have been fired, from the front, according to the reports and photos, and they leave doubts about what was declared by the Warren report. 6. Oswald was a scapegoat to close the case, but it was already well known that JFK's ideas were not well received by the FBI and the CIA, and that according to some theories they wanted to silence him. Many of these theories will be resolved when the documents that President Trump will declassify come to light. There are not many, but they are important enough to know who was the real assassin of JFK in the end. We will soon know.